Here's a beginner's guide to secondary source research. While most of you are probably at least somewhat familiar with the research process in general, you might be wondering, so what exactly is secondary source research? Simply put, secondary sources are sources written by a researcher and not an eyewitness. So here's a kind of silly example. Let's say that a man claims that he has been abducted by aliens. He survives his abduction experience, he comes home, and he writes about it in his diary. Then later, a ufologist, which is just someone who studies UFOs, discovers the man's diary and decides to include it as a source in his book on UFOs. In this example, the diary is an example of a primary source because it is written by an eyewitness about a particular event. On the other hand, the ufologist's book is an example of a secondary source because it draws conclusions based on a primary source. So you can see there's a kind of hierarchy in the research process here. Secondary sources are built from primary sources. And if you've written a standard research paper before, especially in the humanities, more than likely that research paper has used secondary sources. For the purposes of our researched argument essay, we're predominantly going to be dealing with two different kinds of secondary sources: general sources and scholarly sources. General sources can typically be found through a generic Google search. These can include government and university websites, newspaper articles, and blogs, among some other sources too. These sources might be written by experts, but they are not written for experts, meaning they are not guaranteed a rigorous review process. For example, I have multiple degrees in literature within the field of English studies. If I decide to start a blog about literature, even though I am an expert, because my blog is written for a general audience, it's a general source. It's not a reflection of how much I may or may not know. It's just who my target audience is. And remember, for the purposes of writing Project 2, you guys can have up to 3 general secondary sources to include in your argument. The other kind of secondary source that y'all are going to be sifting through is a scholarly source. Scholarly sources can be journal articles, academic books, or sometimes we call academic books on a particular subject monographs, or chapters in an academic collection, anything like that. What makes these sources scholarly is their peer review process. When sources are peer-reviewed, it means that they have both been written by experts and then fact-checked before their publication by other experts. Often the peer review process can be very long and involved. Sometimes there's a blind review process in which the peer reviewers are anonymous, and sometimes the author has to go through multiple rounds of revisions. So by the time a scholarly source is published, it has seen many fact checkers and has been made sure that the argument is as clear and involved and academic and respectable as possible, basically. And oftentimes the peer review process has been overseen by a slew of editors, and this is their whole job. So there are head editors, managing editors, assistant and junior editors. It can be a very involved process. Scholarly sources are written and supported based on other reliable scholarly sources, so they're contributing to the same scholarly conversation. I would encourage you guys to find your own scholarly sources, of which you need at least 4, either through Purdue Library's website, which is linked here, or through Google Scholar, which is also linked here. As Purdue students, part of your tuition pays for your access to a host of databases and academic journals. So we're going to use them for this. So I'm going to show you how to navigate the Purdue Library's website. If you haven't already, go ahead and pull up the Purdue Library's website, and then you're going to choose and type in a keyword or a succinct phrase that's related to the topic that you would like to research for Writing Project 2. If you were searching for a phrase, I would recommend that you put it in quotation marks in the little search box so that the database will pull up those words together instead of those words separately. So for example, here I've typed in monsters. It's just one word. I don't need to put it in quotation marks. However, if I was interested in searching specifically myths and monsters, I would want to type in open quotes, myths and monsters, close quotes, and then hit search. More than likely, your search results are going to pull up a lot of information. So now we're going to use some of the filters that are available at the left-hand side of your screen to pare those down and make sure we're getting only relevant information. I recommend for the purposes of Writing Project 2 that you guys only look for articles from peer-reviewed journals and make sure, since this is an online class, that the sources that you find can be available online. So go ahead and check those boxes. The website also gives you the opportunity to pare your results down based on material type. Again, I recommend articles. Book chapters could also be a good option for you. Even reference entries could be good. And then you can also pare your results down further by specific discipline libraries. So for example, if you are interested in researching the growth mindset in higher education, you're probably going to want to check off humanities, social science, and education. However, if you're looking at something in science, such as like the engineering and science library, you can check that one off. Engineering, there's one specifically for engineering, so you have a lot of options here. We also want to make sure that the results that you find are contemporary and relevant, and one of the best ways to do that is to make sure the information you're looking at has been published within the last 10 or 11 years. So under publication date, check that box and then type in 2010 to the current year, 2021. Additionally, you can pare it down by subject if you want to get really specific, so you can scroll through those options and see which ones are applicable to you. And since this is an English Studies class and first-year composition, make sure that the sources that you find are written in English, even if English is not your first language or if you speak other languages, just so in case some of our peers want to check out your sources, we'll all be able to access them. After you have applied those filters, it's time for you to explore. Comb through those results and see what you find. One of the things that I really like about the Purdue Library's website is that when you're logged into your Purdue Career account, you can actually pin and save articles that you're interested in, but perhaps you don't have time to read in that one sitting. You can save them to your account and you can come back to them. Or you can choose to open up and download PDFs and you can save them to read for later that way too. I've also included here a little quote from American author Zora Neale Hurston, who says, "Research is formalized curiosity. It is poking and prying with a purpose." And that's really, I think, a productive way to think about the secondary source research process. Make sure that your initial investigation is grounded in genuine curiosity, and then you can poke and pry in order to work on your project. Especially if you haven't conducted a lot of secondary source research in the past for previous projects, it can be a little overwhelming. Not only are we dealing with screen fatigue, but also sometimes you can pull up article after article that's written in complex academic language. So it's doesn't always seem super accessible. So here are some tips and tricks that can help you stay on task and also feel like you're achieving something in the research process. I would recommend that you first and foremost look to see if the article that you're looking at has a thesis. Is there a short paragraph or a couple of sentences somewhere where the author says, hey, this is what this article is about? Just like in your own writing, most scholarly writers also start their paragraphs with some kind of topic sentence. So if you want to do a pass through the article where you're just looking for thesis and topic sentences, that could be a good strategy for you, just to hit the high points and get the main ideas. Oftentimes, scholarly writers will summarize their own conclusions in some of the last few paragraphs of their paper. So if you find a thesis and you find some topic sentences, also jump to the last few paragraphs to see if they've written a conclusion. At the sentence level, if you run into sentences that are sometimes 5 or 6 lines long, which can happen, I would recommend that you don't panic. Just look at the very long sentence and identify subjects and verbs first. That's the best way to understand how a sentence is functioning in a larger piece. Oftentimes, academic writers will use footnotes to expand on definitions or to refer to other sources on your topic. So for example, if they include a working definition of this term that you've never heard before, see if there are any footnotes attached to that word, because they might explain it further later in that part of their paper. And finally, when you're combing through these sources, please, 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 it can make all the difference in the world to take effective notes, whatever that means for you. If you're a significant quotes person, make sure you copy and paste those. Or if you're a mind map person, make sure that you're keeping track of what you're reading so that they'll be useful to you later in the research process. As always, you can email me with questions, and good luck.